All right, let's talk about one of the great intellectual showdowns of the 20th century. Picture this. It's 1948, and the BBC gets two absolute titans of philosophy in a room to debate the biggest question there is. Does God exist? And what happened wasn't just an argument. No, it was a total masterclass in logic, belief, and how we even start to wrap our heads around ultimate reality.
So, who do we have in the ring? In one corner, you've got Frederick Copleston. He's a Jesuit priest, a brilliant historian of philosophy. His whole game plan is to use metaphysics. He believes pure logic can take you from the world you can see and touch all the way to God. And in the other corner, the legendary Bertrand Russell, a Nobel laureate, a mathematician, a famous agnostic. His toolkit is modern logic and empiricism. For him, if you can't observe it or prove it with razor-sharp definitions, it's not worth talking about. So yeah, two giants coming at the problem from completely different planets.
So here's how this intellectual duel is going to break down. First up, we'll look at Copleston's big opening gambit, what's called the argument from contingency. Then we'll get into Russell's devastating counterpunch. After that, they switch gears and talk about religious experience. And finally, we're going to see why they end up at a complete and total impasse. Why they just could not agree.
All right, round one. Copleston comes out swinging, but not with faith or the Bible. Nope. He starts with what he sees as pure, cold logic. He thinks he can build a case, step by step, that proves the universe itself logically requires the existence of God.
So Copleston builds his argument like a chain. Step 1, things exist. Simple enough, right? We can all agree on that. Step 2, none of those things just poofed into existence on their own. They depend on other things for their existence. He calls this being contingent. Step 3, you can't just have an endless line of these dependent things, one after another, going back forever. If you did, you'd never find an ultimate reason for anything. Which brings him to the final link, the punchline. There must be something that isn't dependent on anything else. Something that is its own reason for existing. A necessary being.
Let's just make sure we nail down this word, contingent, because it's the key to the whole argument. A contingent being is basically anything that might not have existed. Its existence depends on something else. You're contingent. You needed your parents to exist. This laptop is contingent. It needed a factory. For Copleston, pretty much everything you see in the universe is contingent.
And that leads us to the grand finale of his logical chain, the necessary being. This is the total opposite of contingent. It doesn't depend on anything. It contains the reason for its own existence within itself. It has to exist. It couldn't not exist. And for Copleston, this is the philosophical definition of God. It's the ultimate anchor for the entire chain of reality.
Okay, Copleston has made his case. It's clean. It's logical. But now, it's Russell's turn. And Russell does something brilliant. He doesn't really attack the steps in the chain. Instead, he attacks the very words Copleston is using. He goes right for the philosophical jugular. Russell basically just hits the pause button on the whole debate. He asks this one seemingly simple question that completely reframes everything. What do you actually mean by the phrase necessary being? For a logician like Russell, this isn't a trivial question. This is where he thinks the entire argument just crumbles. And this quote right here is the heart of his objection. Russell says, look, the word necessary has a very specific job to do in the world of logic. It applies to sentences that are true by definition, things philosophers call analytic propositions. He says you can't just snatch that word and try to apply it to an actual thing out there in the world. So for Russell, there are two totally separate buckets. In one bucket, you have necessary propositions. These are truths of logic and math, like a bachelor is an unmarried man. It's true by definition. In the other bucket, you have contingent things, all the actual stuff in the universe, from rocks to stars to people. And Russell's killer point is that you can't cross the streams. Existence for him is always in the second bucket. You can't have a necessary thing any more than you can have a triangular smell. The very phrase is a confusion of categories. So if the idea of a necessary being is a language foul, what's the alternative? Why does the universe exist? Well, for Russell, the answer is, it just does. His answer is famously blunt. The universe is a brute fact. It doesn't require an explanation. Asking why there's a universe, for him, is a meaningless question.
Copleston can see that his logical argument has just hit a brick wall. So what does he do? He pivots. He completely shifts the ground of the debate. He moves away from this abstract, high-level logic and into the much more personal world of human experience. He's like, okay, if you won't accept my logic, how about some data?
Copleston's new strategy is to say, look, for millions of people across history, God isn't the conclusion to a philosophical proof. God is something they have directly experienced. He wants to argue that this deep, personal, mystical experience is its own kind of evidence, pointing to a reality beyond our own.
And he's careful to define what he's talking about. This isn't just a powerful emotion like loving a song. It's a specific feeling of a profound connection to something beyond yourself, something transcendent. And his point is, what's the simplest explanation for this incredibly widespread phenomenon? Well, maybe it's that the thing people feel they're connecting with is actually there. But of course, Russell is right there, ready with the response. He doesn't deny that people have these experiences. He doesn't doubt their sincerity for a second. But he asks the critical question, just because you have a powerful, genuine feeling, does that prove that the cause of your feeling is an objective external reality? And Russell's analogy here is just so clever. He talks about his own life. He says, look, I've read books, biographies, where the characters felt so real to me that they genuinely changed who I am. They had a real impact. But he says that doesn't mean those characters are actually alive and walking around somewhere. For Russell, a religious experience can feel totally real to the person having it, but that's no guarantee that it's anything more than a powerful psychological event.
So you can see where this is going. The argument from logic ended in a stalemate. The argument from experience ended in a stalemate. And as the debate winds down, it becomes clear that there isn't going to be a winner. What becomes clear is that these two men are operating on such different fundamental assumptions that they literally can't find common ground.
And this right here, this is the absolute heart of the disagreement. For Copleston, the universe demands an explanation. Asking why is there something rather than nothing is a perfectly legitimate and important question. For Russell, that question itself is a mistake. It's trying to apply the concept of a cause to the whole shebang, and you just can't do that. It's not that they have different answers to the same question, it's that they disagree on whether the question itself is even valid. So, the huge takeaway here is that this was never just a simple debate about whether God exists. It was a clash of entire worldviews. Copleston's philosophy makes room for questions about ultimate reality. Russell's philosophy, rooted in modern logic, basically says those questions are off limits. They weren't playing the same game because they fundamentally disagreed on the rules. And that leaves us with a really humbling final thought. What this incredible debate really teaches us might be less about God and more about the limits of our own reason. It makes you wonder, right? If two of the smartest people of their time can't even agree on how to start the conversation, what does that say about the rest of us as we try to find our own answers to the biggest questions there are?